What if the kindest, most loving gift you could ever leave your family wasn't money, jewelry, or even your cherished photos, but something as simple as an empty drawer? Imagine that. A drawer that once held clutter now holds peace. That's the quiet power of Decluttering, the Swedish art of death cleaning. But here's the beautiful twist. This practice has nothing to do with death in the way we fear it. It's not morbid. It's not depressing. In fact, it's deeply freeing. It's about taking control while you're still very much alive. It's about deciding what truly matters and letting go of what doesn't on your own terms. Think of it like editing your life story, cutting the parts that no longer move you forward so the good parts can breathe. For seniors, this isn't just about getting rid of old stuff. It's about lifting invisible weight off your heart, your shelves, and your family's future. And the best part? You don't have to do it all at once. This isn't a purge. It's a gentle conversation with your past, your memories, and your legacy. In this video, you'll discover 7 Swedish death cleaning steps that go far beyond tidying up. These are acts of love, subtle, thoughtful, and often surprisingly emotional. Ready to feel lighter? Let's begin. Orlinda Keene never thought she'd end up drowning in her own belongings. At 76, she had lived a colorful, untamed life. A retired cartographer who once traced paths through Wyoming's most elusive terrains, she had spent decades chasing unmarked places and forgotten trails. But somewhere along the way, while she was busy charting the wild, the corners of her home became their own kind of wilderness, quietly collecting the fragments of a life well lived, but not well sorted. It was during a soft, gray afternoon, the kind that makes the world feel like it's holding its breath, that Orlinda went into her shed, looking for a garden hook. Instead, she found something entirely unexpected: her late husband's toolbox. It was tucked behind a leaning tower of unused flower pots, old trellises, and tangled string lights that hadn't twinkled since 2004. The sight of that old red box, rusted at the hinges but unmistakably his, stopped her in her tracks. She sat on the dusty concrete floor and cried, not because of grief, but because she realized how much of her home had become a silent museum of moments she hadn't had the heart to face. That day, she understood something important. Clutter isn't always junk. Sometimes, it's emotion in disguise. A chipped mug might hold memories of Sunday mornings. A faded scarf might still carry the scent of someone we loved. But when these items pile up without purpose or place, they can become overwhelming. Not just physically, but emotionally. For Orlinda, the clutter wasn't just taking up space in her shed. It was crowding her peace of mind. She wasn't a hoarder. She was a rememberer. And like so many of us, she didn't know where the line was between honoring the past and being imprisoned by it. That moment with the toolbox sparked something in her. She didn't call it death cleaning at first. She simply said to herself, "I think it's time I make space for the life I'm still living." And with that, she began, drawer by drawer, shelf by shelf, emotion by emotion. Not rushing, not purging, but curating. A life that felt lighter, clearer, and more intentional. What about you? Have you ever held on to something because it felt too sacred to toss? A letter, a photo, maybe even a pair of shoes? Tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. Sometimes, just sharing it helps us see it more clearly. Step 1. Think of it as a love letter, not a cleanup. The first and most powerful shift in Swedish death cleaning isn't about the objects at all. It's about how you see them. It's not about decluttering for the sake of tidiness or cleanliness. It's about telling your story in a way that your loved ones can actually hear, without having to dig through piles of guesswork. In Sweden, this approach begins with something deceptively simple: intention. When Orlinda Keene started her journey, she made a conscious decision not to treat her belongings like junk. She didn't grab a trash bag and go on a frenzy. Instead, she sat in her favorite old chair with a notebook in her lap and a pen that still smelled faintly of ink and cedar. She began to think about the objects around her, not in terms of what was useful, but in terms of what they meant. She wrote at the top of the page, "If my family had to go through this house without me, what would I want them to find? And what would I want them to feel?" That's when she realized something. Every item she chose to keep or let go of could be part of a love letter. Not the kind written with paper and pen, but with choices, with care, with a sense of what stories are worth passing on, and which ones can be laid gently to rest. Take, for example, the copper teapot she never used. It sat high on a shelf, dusty and quiet, but it once belonged to her mother, who had made tea every evening at exactly 6 p.m., rain or shine. Orlinda didn't want to use it, but she also couldn't bear the thought of it becoming just another thing in a donation bin. So, she wrapped it carefully and included a short note inside. This teapot made our home smell like love. Keep it only if it brings you warmth. If not, pass it on with peace. That's the essence of step 1. You're not erasing your past. You're distilling it. You're choosing what stories will move forward and which ones have already served their purpose. Too often, we avoid cleaning out because we think it's cold-hearted to let go. But reframing it as a love letter changes everything. It becomes an act of clarity, not detachment. Of connection, not rejection. You're not just preparing your space. You're preparing your heart to be remembered for who you are, not just what you owned. Orlinda started labeling items not just with names, but with messages. This quilt is full of snow days and popcorn. This book got me through the winter your grandfather passed. These weren't just notes, they were anchors. Her family wouldn't have to wonder, why did she keep this? They'd know. What item in your home tells the best story? Maybe it's a necklace, a recipe card, a photograph, or even a chair. Share it in the comments. You'd be surprised how one memory can spark a connection you didn't know you needed. Step 2. Use the no one cares test. Step 2 in Swedish Death-Cleaning might sound a little harsh at first, but don't let the name fool you. It's called the no one cares test, and it's not about being cold or indifferent. It's about being honest, kind, and realistic about what will actually matter after you're gone. Orlinda Keene faced this moment when she came across a long-forgotten drawer in her study, one filled to the brim with trail maps she had drawn by hand over decades. Each one was a work of art, complete with handwritten notations, compass roses, and sketches of rock formations and old cabins hidden deep in the Wyoming backcountry. They were beautiful, personal, intimate, but there were over 60 of them. When her son visited, she unrolled one of her favorites. He smiled and said, "Mom, these are incredible, but I wouldn't even know where to start using them." She laughed. He wasn't being ungrateful. He was just being real. These maps had value to her life, but they didn't have value to his. And that's when she realized, just because something is meaningful to us doesn't mean it will be meaningful to others. That doesn't make it worthless. It just means its purpose may have already been fulfilled. So she chose 3 maps, the ones that told the best stories. One where she got lost in a storm and found shelter under a pine ridge. One where she hiked with her daughter and a stubborn mule named Jasper. And one that marked the route she and her late husband walked on their anniversary. The rest, she let go with a soft smile and a whispered, "Thank you." That's the no one cares test in action. It's not meant to be cynical. It's meant to be compassionate. Ask yourself, will anyone know what this item is? Will they know why it mattered to me? Will it matter to them enough to keep it? If the answer is no, you're not discarding the memory. You're simply choosing not to pass along confusion, guilt, or the burden of having to guess. You're clearing the emotional clutter before it becomes someone else's task. Orlinda said this step was surprisingly freeing. Not because she wanted to forget the past, but because she realized the best parts of her life weren't in boxes. They were in her stories, and in the moments she had shared. What's one thing you've kept that, deep down, you know no one else would understand? A collection? A scrapbook? Maybe an odd trinket? Share your thoughts in the comments. It helps others see they're not alone in facing these tough decisions. But there's one trap that causes most seniors to stop halfway through their death-cleaning journey. It's so common, even Orlinda almost fell for it, until she discovered a surprisingly gentle way around it. Step 3. Start with the easy goodbyes. Step 3 in Swedish Death-Cleaning is where momentum begins, not with dramatic gestures, but with small, almost forgettable victories. This step is called Start with the Easy Goodbyes. There's an old Swedish saying that loosely translates to, "Don't start with the heart." In other words, leave the emotional minefields for later. Don't open the box of love letters. Don't pull out the wedding china or your child's kindergarten drawings. Not yet. That's like trying to lift a boulder before you've warmed up your muscles. Instead, Begin with the clutter that holds zero emotional weight, the things no one would argue about, not even you. Orlinda Keene had read about this approach, but it wasn't until she stood in front of her hallway drawer, the one stuffed with mystery keys, bent paper clips, expired coupons, and dried-out pens, that it truly clicked. With a deep breath and a bit of skepticism, she began tossing. One key after another went into a ceramic bowl. She had no idea what most of them opened. A few were likely for doors that didn't exist anymore, storage units she'd long since emptied, padlocks that rusted in another state. It was oddly satisfying, like solving a riddle with a punchline. This key opens absolutely nothing. 15 minutes later, the drawer was empty. Not just cleared, but cleansed. She hadn't cried. She hadn't wrestled with nostalgia. But she felt lighter, empowered. That single drawer gave her the confidence to walk into the closet and say, "All right, let's keep going." This step is essential because it trains your brain to associate decluttering with success, not sorrow. You begin with logical choices, not emotional ones. You collect small wins that stack into a rhythm. Start with broken zippers, instruction manuals for appliances you no longer own, dried-up glue sticks, single socks, buttons that fell off clothes you already gave away, tangled phone cords for flip phones you'll never turn on again. Every drawer, every shelf, every tote full of someday items contains a handful of easy goodbyes just waiting for you to let them go. And here's the secret. Once you start letting go of the little things, the bigger ones don't feel quite as heavy. Because now you've proven to yourself, you can do this. You've got the strength, the clarity, and the purpose to keep moving forward. Orlinda often said, that drawer of keys was the start of something bigger. It wasn't about organization. It was about reclaiming control. What's your easiest starting point? The junk drawer, the garage, maybe that linen closet filled with towels no one's touched in years. Tell us in the comments. You might just inspire someone else to take their first step, too. Step 4. The Legacy Box Principle. Imagine this. Your family gathers in your home years from now, not to sort through chaos, but to open a single, beautiful box filled only with the things that matter most. Not junk, not mystery items, just treasures, small, meaningful echoes of who you truly were. That's the power of the Legacy Box. Swedish Death-Cleaning invites us to set limits in a loving way, not to erase our lives, but to distill them into a handful of items that carry weight, warmth, and clarity. And the Legacy Box is where that distillation lives. When Orlinda Keene reached this step, she had already felt the momentum from sorting keys and tossing broken odds and ends. But she knew there were still objects that didn't fit into the keep or toss categories. Things that carried stories, soul, and just enough magic that she couldn't bear to let them go, but also couldn't imagine her children having to dig through piles of things just to find them. So she picked out one sturdy, cedar-scented wooden box and gave it a name, the Legacy Box. Inside, she placed only 3 items. A compass from her first solo hiking trip across the Wind River Range. It still had scuffs from the time it bounced down a hill, but to her, it marked the moment she proved to herself that she could navigate life alone. A small, yellowed scrap of paper with a lullaby handwritten by her grandmother. The tune was almost lost to time, but every now and then, the words would drift back into her memory like smoke from a distant chimney. A faded photo of her 2 children, arms covered in mud, building a backyard tent that collapsed twice before it finally stood up straight. She remembered watching from the kitchen window, laughing and tearing up all at once. That was it. She could have added more, much more. But the Legacy Box isn't about volume. It's about meaning. It's about curating a collection that tells your story clearly and gently, so your loved ones feel connected, not overwhelmed. You see, when you limit your keepsakes to a single box, you're not discarding memories, you're highlighting them. You're making it easier for others to truly see you. No guessing, no guilt, no stress. Just a simple box filled with love, resilience, and identity. And here's the surprising part. By giving yourself boundaries, you give your memories more space to breathe. Each item becomes more sacred, more appreciated, less lost in the noise. Orlinda's children later said that opening her Legacy Box felt like opening a treasure chest, not because it was full of expensive things, but because it was full of her. Her humor, her spirit, her quiet strength. If you had to choose just 3 things for your legacy box, only 3, what would they be? A childhood toy? A letter? A recipe? Share them below. You might be surprised how powerful those small choices can be. Step 5. Label everything with emotion, not just names. As Erlinda Keen moved deeper into her Swedish Death-Cleaning journey, she realized that many of the objects she had chosen to keep still held a kind of invisibility. A photo without a date, a blanket without a backstory, a trinket with no explanation. That's when she discovered a truth that changed everything. People don't remember objects. They remember the feelings tied to them. And so, she picked up her pen again, not to make lists or organize categories, but to begin labeling with emotion. One afternoon, she sat at her dining room table with a box of manila tags and a teacup of ink. And piece by piece, she began to write. Not names, not dates, but stories. She tied a tiny note to a silver thimble. This belonged to Aunt Mira, who believed in magic. She swore it helped her sow courage into every hem. She tucked a card into a worn paperback. This book comforted me the week your father passed. I read the last page with tears on my coffee spoon. She slipped a ribbon around an old cast-iron skillet and added a scrap of paper. The first omelet I ever made your grandfather burned so badly. We ate toast instead and laughed until we couldn't breathe. Each tag turned an object into a thread of connection. Instead of leaving behind question marks. What's this? Why did she keep this? Erlinda was giving her family emotional breadcrumbs. An invisible trail they could follow straight back to her heart. This is what makes labeling with emotion so different. It's not about organizing, it's about humanizing. It tells your loved ones not just what something was, but why it mattered. Too often, when people inherit a house full of stuff, they feel overwhelmed. They don't know what's sacred and what's junk. But when a tag says, "This spoon stirred every pot of winter soup I made when you were sick," suddenly, that spoon becomes a vessel of memory. And here's the best part. Labeling emotional meaning doesn't require anything fancy. You don't need expensive stationery or calligraphy. A sticky note, a folded slip of paper, even writing directly on a box lid. What matters is the message, not the medium. Erlinda found this process deeply healing. It allowed her to revisit her life with kindness, to relive the moments she loved most, and gently say goodbye to the ones she no longer needed to hold so tightly. Have you ever wished you knew the story behind something left behind by a loved one? Or have you labeled an item in your own home that holds a story? Share in the comments. Those small stories have a way of sparking deep connections. But what Erlinda did next surprised even her closest friends, not because it was hard, but because it was brave. Step 6. Create a ritual to let go. Letting go doesn't have to be a lonely act of stuffing garbage bags in the garage. In fact, some of the most meaningful moments of Swedish Death-Cleaning happen not in silence, but in community. Erlinda Keen, who had always found comfort in maps and solitude, knew she needed something different for this next part of her journey. She wanted to say goodbye to more than objects. She wanted to release memories, chapters, and versions of herself she no longer needed to carry. But she didn't want to do it alone. That's when she created something she called a memory swap. Here's how it worked. Erlinda invited a few close friends, some from her hiking days, others from her local book club, and even one neighbor she hadn't seen in years. Each person was asked to bring a small box filled with things they were ready to part with. The only rule, each item had to come with a short story, written or spoken. They gathered in her sunroom on a late Sunday afternoon. Light jazz played softly in the background. A table in the center held tea, shortbread, and a few flickering candles. And around it, boxes opened like chapters in an old novel. One friend brought an embroidered pillow her mother had stitched during chemotherapy. Another brought a necklace from a marriage she'd long outgrown. Erlinda brought a hiking badge she earned on a trail she'd never walk again. Each story was shared. Some were funny, others brought tears. And in the end, each person chose one item to take home. Not because it was useful or valuable, but because it meant something. A way of saying, your story now lives with me, too. This simple ritual turned decluttering into a celebration. It gave weight and grace to the act of letting go. Instead of tossing items into donation bins in silence, Erlinda and her friends witnessed one another's transitions. They affirmed each other's histories. And most importantly, they gave their memories a second life, together. Why does this matter? Because parting with our possessions can feel like shedding skin. It's vulnerable, even painful. But when we bring ritual into the process, when we share it, mark it, honor it, it becomes sacred. Not a loss, but a transformation. And the ripple effect is stunning. After that gathering, Orlinda's friend Delia started hosting monthly letting go luncheons. Another friend, Erin, began leaving tagged items in public spaces with notes that said, "Take me. I've had a good life, and I'm ready for a new home." Swedish Death-Cleaning is not about erasing your story. It's about curating it. And sometimes, curating it with others makes it all the more beautiful. Would you ever hold a gathering like this? A memory swap, a letting go circle, or even a storytelling tea? Why or why not? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your ideas. You might spark someone else's healing in the process. And finally, in the last step, Orlinda didn't just clear space in her home. She redefined what freedom looked like for the rest of her life. Step 7. Make it a seasonal act of peace. For Orlinda Keene, death cleaning didn't end when the closets were tidy or when the last donation box was sealed. No, the true gift of this journey revealed itself in the quiet months that followed. It was in those still, golden hours of early spring, when the snowmelt whispered at the window panes and crocuses dared to bloom, that Orlinda created something rare, a ritual of renewal. She began calling it her day of peace. Once a year, always in April, Orlinda set aside one morning for herself. No appointments, no phone calls, just a cup of bergamot tea, a worn notebook, and the gentle intention to walk through her home, not to clean, but to listen. This wasn't the hurried purge of spring cleaning. It was something more sacred, more inward. She'd walk slowly through her rooms, touching objects with care. A worn scarf, a photo in a crooked frame, a drawer of postcards, some yellowed with time. And with each item, she'd ask a quiet question. Does this still serve the person I am now? Sometimes the answer was yes. Sometimes it was no. But unlike the first time she decluttered, when grief and overwhelm sometimes tangled her judgment, this annual ritual brought only peace. No rush, no guilt, just rhythm. Because here's what Orlinda learned. We don't just accumulate clutter in our homes. We accumulate it in our hearts. Old fears, outdated dreams, forgotten obligations. And the act of gentle, seasonal review helps us shed those layers. Just as trees release their leaves and rivers clear silt from their beds, we too are meant to let go in cycles. One spring, Orlinda let go of her late husband's fishing vest, not because it stopped meaning something, but because it had finished teaching her. Another year, she released a stack of journals, tearing out only the pages with poems she loved and burning the rest beneath a full moon. Each act felt like an exhale. The most beautiful part? Orlinda began to notice how this ritual softened her grief. There were fewer sharp corners, fewer pangs of regret. The things she kept became more visible, more cherished. The things she let go of made space, not just on shelves, but in her spirit. Death cleaning, she realized, wasn't about preparing for death at all. It was about living more lightly, on purpose, with space for joy and breath and change. And over time, her day of peace evolved. Some years, she played old music. Others, she lit incense and opened the windows. But always, there was that same thread: gratitude, clarity, release. If you had a personal day of peace, how would you spend it? What object would you revisit? What memory might you release? Let us know in the comments. Your ritual might inspire someone else's renewal. In the final stretch of her life, Orlinda Keene didn't just create space in her closets. She created space for love to linger without weight. Her home became less of a museum of things and more of a sanctuary of presence. Each room held not clutter, but clarity. You could walk through her front door and breathe. There were no confusing boxes in the attic, no piles of tangled cords or drawers full of nameless buttons. What remained was purposeful, thoughtful, quietly beautiful. And perhaps that's why, after Orlinda passed, her family didn't face the usual heartache that so often accompanies sorting through a loved one's belongings. Instead, they found peace, not from the absence of grief, but from the presence of intention. Her granddaughter, Elise said something no one expected. "You can feel Grandma's love in every empty space." And it was true. The shelf that once overflowed with knickknacks now held a single pottery bowl with a note. "I use this for blueberries every summer morning. I hope you will too." The linen closet, once stacked with decades of faded towels, held only 3, soft, fragrant, folded like offerings. "These are the ones I always reach for after a hard day," read a handwritten card. There was no pressure to make sense of things. No guessing games. No unspoken guilt. Everything she left behind told a story or gave permission to move on. And that is the lightness of letting go. Not the absence of things, but the presence of clarity. It's a final act of love, a silent embrace that says, "I thought of you. I didn't want you to carry what I no longer needed." Orlinda's story is not about how much she gave away. It's about what she chose to keep and how intentionally she framed every choice. She made room for others to remember her with warmth, not overwhelm. With smiles, not spreadsheets. Her legacy wasn't packed in boxes. It echoed in the stillness. It showed up in the places where love was allowed to breathe. If someone walked through your home tomorrow, what feeling would you want them to carry away? Peace? Laughter? Understanding? Let us know in the comments, because it's never too early to shape the story we'll one day leave behind. If Orlinda's journey touched you, hit that like button and share this video with someone you love. Let's spread the idea that letting go can be the most generous gift of all. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more inspiring life advice made just for you and your journey.